Since the 2005 revival of Doctor Who, there has been an almost ever-present element to the show that rarely played a role in the classic series: romance. The Doctor getting themselves caught up in the type of feelings and relationships that they spent 40 years being above. Doctor Who fans don't seem to agree on much, but it seems like quite a common sentiment that this is something the show could do without. The Doctor doesn't need to be kissing and cuddling. We should return to the idea of the character as our inaccessible yet heroic guide to the universe, sharing their travels with a friend but nothing more. Smooching may have been good once or even twice, but we've had enough. And I'm here to say that I disagree. I think it's great when the Doctor does kissing and cuddling. I think they should do it more often, and I'd like to dive into why. In order to explain why romance in Doctor Who is something I think works, I'm mostly going to need to talk about when I think it's worked, but I'll start by speaking more broadly. There is something so inherently romantic about the setup of the series that is hard to ignore no matter how you look at it. You meet this mysterious hero who sweeps in to take you away across the stars. They show you time and space and have a duty to protect and fight for you throughout your travels. The premise is pure romantic fantasy, and for the characters involved, it's impossible for their relationship to not become pretty intense. They're raised up above the mundanity of everyday life in a way that means there are very few people back home that they can possibly relate to. The two central characters becoming romantically entangled feels like such a natural evolution of this dynamic to me, especially in the modern version of the show, where the characters are so much at the forefront of what drives the story. Also, in something that's always perfect for delicious drama, a romantic relationship between the Doctor and their companion is practically always fated to end poorly. We know as an audience member that the adventure will continue while actors come and go, but the Doctor knows that there are very few people who can live for as long as they can, especially with the lifestyle that they have. So there's this inevitability of tragedy that can add such a rich layer to everything that happens. I suppose now would be a good time to give some examples, because in my eyes, romance always adds something worthwhile to the dynamics it's part of, and it has led to some of the most beautiful and heartbreaking moments and episodes. Something that really struck me in my recent Series 1 rewatch is just how present the romantic subtext is from the start. It's maybe to be expected, with Russell T Davies very deliberately unpacking the potential human drama of space-time adventures, but so much of the discussion about her romance surrounds her time with the later, sexier Doctor, so it surprised me to see it so prominent so early. That being said, once the sexy Doctor does come along, it really goes all the way from heavy subtext to blatant text. As this was the first Doctor-companion pairing that modern audiences saw, I think adding this wrinkle was an excellent idea. Giving the whole thing a more overt relationship parallel really adds this layer of relatability to the drama. Some may argue that when it comes to escapist fiction, we don't necessarily need our characters to be in relatable situations. But to me, having this extra humanity in the otherwise alien environments and stories makes everything all the more engaging and accessible. Especially in Series 1 and 2, when so many of the show's concepts are being introduced to the audience for the very first time. I don't think Rose's characterization ever suffers as a consequence. She never feels like she's just a love interest. If anything, she's our lead character and the Doctor is the object of her desire. It works for the same reason that keeping Jackie in the story works. Beyond that, it just feels really good to see two characters be happy and in love, which obviously means that when it all becomes sad, it becomes really sad. The end of Doomsday, where Rose and the Doctor are separated, was a moment that was always going to be important. It was the first main companion departure of the new series, but I don't think it would have hit anywhere near as devastatingly hard if they weren't so visibly in love with one another when they were wrenched apart. Their reunion, both in anticipation and execution, holds so much weight thanks to the attention and development that their relationship is given across both their time together and apart. There's more depth to these stories than the people reducing it to frivolous soap opera nonsense would care to admit, and there's a real understanding of what makes something satisfying to a viewer. Speaking of stories that are satisfying for a viewer, The Girl in the Fireplace is a wonderful standalone slice of Doctor Who romance. As the story plays out, we see the Doctor spend mere hours with Madame de Pompadour over the course of years of her life. The relationship they develop is so unique to the time travel component and so tantalizing in its incompleteness. You fully believe that if circumstances were different, that they could be so happy together, and the way the tragedy unfolds is just beautiful. Quite frankly, it's an absolutely ridiculous episode to make in the midst of a two-series romance arc between the Doctor and Rose, but somehow it doesn't actually harm either relationship. The episode is so superbly done, and frankly I'm grateful that it exists. But if we're talking about the inevitable tragedy of these relationships, River Song's story is one that plays into it very creatively. We know these characters are going to be torn apart eventually, so why not start with that and work backwards? In some ways that's more tragic, but also it feels like a direct response to the potential question of, well, what's the point if they're not going to end up together? Because they find a lovely way of making it work and enjoying the journey on their terms. terms. Seeing a pairing where each member is out of sync with the other is a fun, fascinating, and often really moving sci-fi spin on a relationship. It's the sort of love story that only the Doctor could be part of, and in the character's final appearance, they find a seemingly impossible happily ever after in one of the show's best ever emotional moments. Let's talk Clara. She has a kind of flirty romance with the 11th Doctor that can be fun and funny in Series 7, but I think its most interesting impact is on the regeneration into the 12th Doctor. It adds this compelling question of how much a Doctor-companion relationship is defined by attraction to a specific incarnation, and it's exemplified by the fact that Clara's Doctors exist on opposing ends of the young and sexy spectrum, with Smith being young and Capaldi being sexy. Although some people think Series 8 shelves a lot of the previous incarnation's romance, I'd say that throughout 12 and Clara's time together, it's hard not to see a powerful, intimate relationship develop. It's something that's still somewhat open to interpretation, but the intensity and depth of the feelings they have for one another are so apparent that I'm happy to read it as a form of romantic love that you can only really achieve with your time-traveling partner. Personally, that reading is something that I feel elevates the emotional devastation that comes from the whole series arc and its resolution. It's delightfully sad, and something that I find more fulfilling when their hybrid pairing is viewed through the lens of two people who are truly meant to be together. Their time in the diner almost has a direct parallel to Doomsday, they're just separated by something different. There are, of course, romances that I don't think fully work. Chris Chibnall left me wanting much more from Yasmin and the Doctor, just as he left me wanting much more from everything. But I'm still kind of glad that Thasmin was an element that was introduced. It brings something to the character of Yaz in Flux and Beyond that maybe was lacking before. It's not that she gets transformed into nothing but a love interest, but she suddenly has something to want, something to feel, and something to lose. She's better off for having loved the Doctor, both within the story and as a character. And if making me care about a Chibnall storyline doesn't fully showcase the power of love, I don't know what will. Now that I've sung the praises of romantic storylines in Doctor Who, I guess now it's only fair that I bring up the issues that people have with it, looking at both sides. I'm like the BBC, but impartial. The big problem is oversaturation. Romance in some form has played a part in every Doctor's life since the revival, actually since the movie. It's rarely something that goes away for too long, but for the first few decades of Doctor Who's existence, it just wasn't part of the show's identity. The Doctor got along just fine until Americans decided he needed modernization with smooches and mushy drama. Although actually, the Doctor does nearly get married in the very first season of Classic Who. He meets a lady in the Aztecs and accidentally gets engaged to her. Although it was an accident, he doesn't seem too strongly opposed to the idea. But this was, of course, before they'd really decided on the Doctor being from another planet, which I guess is a good point. Showing the Doctor as part of a relatively earthy relationship with an earthy person definitely does bring them down to our level. It's humanizing in a way that might harm the alien appeal of the character. We see this a little in Series 3. Just as the stories are really building the Doctor up as this legendary hero, he's also at his most mopey and annoying thanks to the loss of Rose. It harms his relationship with Martha and her character as a whole. She's almost framed as the second best before she even gets a chance to make people love her. And that's a real shame because she's a character who deserves to be loved. What's also a real shame is some of Eleven's characterization when it comes to Clara. Although she does fancy him, she feels a lot more like the object of his desire. It makes the Doctor a bit gross and unpleasant in a way that isn't alien, just creepy in a familiar and human way. There can maybe be wider issues in how these pairings are presented with regard to power dynamics. Take a Time Lord who's lived for over 2,000 years and pair them with a 20-year-old human. It makes sense if some people think that's strange or icky. Though I'd say that's more opinion-based than something objectively moral. Once we start going into fantasy and applying strict real-world rules, there's not much that's going to stand up. To me, it comes down to the execution. Another argument against romance has nothing to do with it being bad. It's just that the alternative is too good to go without. Because it's great to have the Doctor involved in platonic friendships, or a student-teacher dynamic, or a Doctor-Nardole dynamic, which is a category in itself. Non-romantic pairings have been some of the show's most popular and entertaining. Romantic drama can be found in other characters as well. We don't necessarily need the Doctor. We have it with Amy and Rory, Danny and Clara, Bill and Heather. And also, it's not like romance is an absolute necessity. It's obviously not the be-all and end-all of character drama. It can be great to see strangers become friends, and friends becoming best friends. A story about grief and loss can be just as powerful and sad when it's about a really good mate. That love is an incredibly real thing. But I think in an ideal world, there's room for both. Stories about mates and stories about mates. Variety is great. As the old saying goes, it's the Spice Girls of life. I'd argue that the unfortunate messiness of Martha's story is part of the reason that Donna works so well as this totally non-romantic friend for the Doctor. Just because it's possible to have these stories told effectively without romance doesn't mean that the romantic angle should just never be included. If we start breaking art down into what's necessary, we'll arrive at the most formulaic and bare-bones experiences, when they're meant to be defined by the feelings that they inspire. Beyond all the concrete reasons I can name, romance is just something I want to see. It's always just nice and happy and awful and sad, and I love it. But admittedly, we probably have seen a bit too much of it in recent stories. So, what should they do? I guess I'm going to slightly agree with the masses on this one, but maybe for different reasons. There should be a break from romance. Maybe not one that lasts for decades, but long enough so that people stop bloody complaining about it. And long enough so that the next romance they do feels like something new. Because then I'd like them to go all in on a love story. The issues that people may have had with previous examples of romance may not apply to a new story by a new writer featuring new characters. I don't think the Doctor needs to be made more human to be in love. If anything, by really committing to this dynamic, we can explore and unpack what it means for a 1,000-year-old alien to be in love with a human. Done correctly, it will simultaneously bring the character down to our level, but also expose just how inaccessibly alien they can be. This is something I really love about Series 9, but the subtlety of that relationship leads to ambiguity and disagreement about whether it's even romance, which is something that came up a lot with Yasmin and 13 too, annoyingly given how much of a milestone it was. So I really want this next one to be explicit. Not explicit, just, unambiguous. Blatant may be the word. So much of whether something is a good idea depends on who's writing it and how it's executed, but I feel like this really could be a good idea. And yeah, on the representation front, LGBTQ+ storytelling in Doctor Who still has a long way to go, but we've seen the Doctor in so many straight pairings, and it would be cool for so many reasons to have more dynamics that differ from that. If they want Ncuti's Doctor to be part of that, that would be great. Additionally, if they want him to be the Doctor that returns to a more conventional platonic dynamic with his companions, I can also see that working. Everything we've seen of him and Millie looks like the most charming best friends energy that I'd be more than happy to just see play out on screen. But I definitely do think that by taking the stance that romance is something the series needs to fully abandon, you're robbing the potential for another episode that breaks the world's heart like Doomsday, or heals it like Husbands of River Song, or does a mixture of both like Girl in the Fireplace. Obviously, if you oppose the idea of Doctor Who ever falling or being in love, then we just aren't going to see eye to eye here. Although, if the right balance is found, then maybe we don't need to. You'll get enough stories that don't involve all the smoochy stuff, which I'll also enjoy. Then you have to stomach a bit of smooching for a bit. Everyone gets their way, which is to say, I get two things I like, and you get a mixture of good and bad. Perfect. But in all seriousness, this is something that is always going to come down to the individual. It all depends on the type of stories you prefer and the way you view Doctor Who as a character and a series. It's impossible to point to proof of why either argument is correct. It's all just vibes, which makes it quite refreshing, I think. I hope you've enjoyed and understood my stance on it though. As always, this is something I'd love to hear more opinions on. What is it about Doctor Who romance that makes you love it or hate it? What's your favourite romance? What's your least favourite romance? Where do you see Ncuti's Doctor fitting into the smoochy equation? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and for the support of my last video. After a year's absence, it's very nice to know that anyone is still here. I've got more Doctor Who videos in the pipeline, including coverage of the 60th, and hopefully more videos about other things that I'm praying will find an audience. So please do subscribe, and like this video, share this video so more people can find it. I'll see you very soon. Love you lots.